them what we should review. You got the three of us. Each week we say, no, you're in charge of it. No, this time it is your turn. And you have voted this week. Let's go over what we had as far as package. We had Tron Legacy. We had Priest. Art School Confidential coming in with a strong 0 votes on that one. So clearly that is not on anyone's radar.
It means that Bruce is going to put that on the list forever.
That's probably true. though there were 2 votes for the perennial all-star Sam J. Jones, The Spirit. So that one's always kind of kicking in. Now, as of this recording, these are tied. But as of the deadline, which I was smart this week, is I actually put that deadline into the post and everything, so people knew when the time was up. But even though it's tied, Black Hole is actually our winner this week as of Wednesday morning. That's it was leading by 1 vote. So
what was it tied with?
It was tied with Priest.
Oh, okay.
So Black Hole and Priest technically tied, but as of the deadline, Black Hole was the one who actually won. Tron Legacy is in a fairly close third.
I want to propose a new clause. If it ever ends in a tie, we just replay the Robin Hood episode. We don't even re-record Robin Hood. We just replay the same episode.
The same one that we did again. But no, it was, listen, if it was a dead heat, usually we will kind of be the deciding vote, I guess. Whichever one's usually easier to get, I think, is the answer of how that normally works.
Yeah.
It's like, we'd have to purchase that one. Let's do the one that's free. Let's do the free one. So that's how that usually goes. But this one, Under the Wire, Black Hole, Disney's Black Hole from what's the year? Is it 80?
79.
79. 70. I knew it was like right on that cusp there, one or the other. So that's what you folks have done. And you know what? Not only do you get that awesome little, we'll call it a duty. I like calling it a duty. It's a little bit more important. It's important for you to vote there. But you also get the pre-show, post-show, and, of course, the Dinger Zone. We are smack dab in some Fast and Furious, boys and girls, so go check all that stuff out. Learn yourself a little bit about speed and family. It's very important. And how to drink a Corona like a crazy person. So check that all out, patreon.com/HMP. And if you can't do that, please leave us a review on iTunes, 5 stars, a.k.a. Humdinger.
Humdinger.
And if you have to, do like King Solomon's Frog and steal your Nana's iPad and throw a 5-star review on there, we really appreciate that. Speaking of which, let's go to the old, where is it at here? I haven't used it in so long. Let's open up the old HMP mailbag. Damn it, come on.
Bale's here.
And this one comes to us from one King Solomon Frog. It's entitled Homage or Homage, depending on how you want to say it. Dear Adam, Sean, and Bruce, during this quarantine, I've spent a lot of time watching old superhero movies and listening to the accompanying HMP. With all that knowledge swirling around in my head, please consider this my homage to the podcast. Keep up the great work, King Solomon's Frog. And he has attached an audio file. Let's take a listen.
Dear Adam, Sean, and Bruce, this is David S. Goyer, writer, director, producer, and General President, International Brotherhood of Teamsters. Working my way up through America's largest, most diverse union, starting in the solid waste division, I've learned a thing or two about death feuds. Aside from Death Feud being the alternate name of Savage Harbor, the 1987 West German direct-to-video release starring Robert Mitchum's second son Christopher, and America's favorite Stallone, Frank, death feuds are part and parcel here at the IBT. In 1991, when I revised a draft of a screenplay of Pet Sematary 2, but didn't get the credit for those revisions in the final film, I started a death feud against its star, Edward Furlong. It took 27 years, but I wasted that punk in the first scene of Terminator, Dark Fate. So when you start a death feud with Maria Menounos, let me be the first to say, way to go. It may take some time, and you may have some sweet victories along the way that soften your resolve, like getting Jor-El on the back of a dragon, or having a moderately successful superhero movie podcast review all 3 of my Blade movies. Thank you, All Podcasts Matter. Really? Are you going to keep going with that name? But don't lose focus on being Salieri to Menounos' Mozart. If you do follow through, I've got some revisions for the Amadeus movie where the great-grandfathers of the characters of Nerd Spawn Genesis poison the great-grandmother of the star of Sharknado 3. Oh, hell no. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go work on my lyrics for Rock Me Salieri.
Thank you, David S.
That was
Goyer,
great.
for sending in a
That
voicemail.
was great. That was great.
Oh, man.
That was really good. Thanks, man.
Oh, dude.
Better than anything we've done in like 3 years.
Yeah, it's funnier. If you'd like to send us an email or even a voicemail here, like David Goyer, a.k.a. King Solomon's Frog, email us at heromoviepodcast@gmail.com. Let's close up the old mailbag.
Fails here.
Oh, we don't use that enough. Let's go ahead and take a listen to the trailer for The Black Hole.
A place beyond man's vision, but not his reach. It is the most mysterious and awesome point in the universe, where the here and now may be forever. It is unavoidable. Moving through space, swallowing everything in its path. Radio waves, light, even planets and stars.
Are you programmed to speak? Gravity's at maximum, Dan.
My God, I think it's got us.
We've got a break here, too.
Now, man is about to enter the black hole. A journey that begins where everything ends.
Alrighty, that was the trailer for The Black Hole from 1979. IMDb plotline: a research vessel finds a missing ship commanded by a mysterious scientist on the edge of a black hole. Ooh. This is starring Anthony Perkins, Robert Forrester, Joseph Bottoms, one of my favorite names in film, Ernest Borgnine, Yvette Mimir, it's a French name, I don't know, and Maximilian Schnell, directed by Gary Nelson. You know what time it is, boys and girls.
It's time for Bruce's Comic Book Connection.
Bruce, what do you got for us with The Black Hole?
Well, around the time of The Black Hole's initial theatrical release, Disney used their newspaper comic strip, Walt Disney's Treasury of Classic Tales, to tell the classic tale of the not yet released Disney sci-fi extravaganza, The Black Hole. And when they brought this classic tale to be told in the funny pages, they wanted to tell the tale in the grandest style a classic tale can be told. So they brought in the king himself, Jack Kirby. The Black Hole comic strip was written by a guy named Carl Fahlberg, who was an assistant director and story consultant on the classic animated film Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And of course, it was drawn by the guy who gave us the Fantastic Four, the New Gods, Etrigan the Demon, and a Halloween costume that looked surprisingly like Spider-Man, though it predated Spider-Man by a couple of years. And the credited creators of Spider-Man claim Kirby didn't have any part in Spider-Man's creation, even though Kirby drew the first Spider-Man cover and thus drew the first image of Spider-Man that the world likely ever saw, but he is in no way a co-creator of Spider-Man, or Thanos for that matter. He had nothing to do with that either. Jack Kirby's job drawing The Black Hole was one of his many commercial gigs, the kind of thing you do after all the stale ramen noodles Marvel and DC paid him with have run out, and there's still 8 days left in the month, and he'd rather draw the box art for the Big Jim toy line than go without food for a week and a day. Now, if I may, I just want to pause to say that oftentimes artists are not paid at a level that is commensurate with the profitability of the work they do. Now back to the Comic Connection. Carl Fahlberg also worked on one of the all-time great cartoon shows, serving as a storyman and story director for the classic The Three Robonic Stooges, a property for which I've written multiple comic book spec scripts, only to find out the comic book rights are in a sort of limbo between DC and American Mythology Comics. Thus, I have officially quit writing. Now, the Black Hole classic Disney Tale comic strip ran for 26 weeks, which was half a year back then, and nobody really knows if anyone liked it or not because it was a newspaper comic strip, and people who bought newspapers for the comic strips back then were probably only buying it for like Peanuts or Blondie or something like that, and I have absolutely no idea how to determine if a comic strip was a success. But there was a totally unrelated 4-issue comic book run based on the Black Hole, and the comic books can easily be labeled as unsuccessful. They were published by Whitman Comics, and it is painfully obvious the creators had no idea what the movie was about because it was a bunch of general space adventures that the crew went on after they passed through to the other side of the black hole. The only way it could have been more obvious that the comic book creators were denied access to the movie script would have been if the crew included a big green alien space bunny. So pour a little bit out for all the leppy smugglers that aren't here anymore. Rest in peace, Jax. And the first 3 issues are readily available, often still in the factory-sealed triple pack in which they were sold. The trio can generally be picked up online for anywhere between $5 and $20 US, but for some reason, not many of issue 4 made it into circulation. And as a result, it has become one of those collector's grail items, not quite as sought after as the Boba Fett figure complete with launchable rocket, but sought after nonetheless. As of May 2012, and yes, I know that's 8 years ago, but it's all I've got to work with, there were only 6, that's right, only 6 CGC certified copies of Black Hole issue number 4. None of those had a rating higher than 9.2, and in 2014, a copy of Black Hole number 4 sold for $6,250. Which, if you're keeping track, is enough money to buy 208 economically disadvantaged children lunch for a month. But who cares about hungry kids when you got a copy of the Black Hole number 4 in your hands, right?
Yeah, screw you, kids.
And just to make it clear, this collector's item comic book isn't even drawn by Jack Kirby. He only drew the comic strip, which rather than being collected was likely used to line bird cages, litter boxes, and other stereotypical things you do with newspapers. So I guess this just goes to say, keep on striving for excellence so some terrible piece of work can be sought after due to its, quote, rarity, while Hall of Fame level work is used for pets to poop on.
Jack Kirby, played by the late, great Michael Parks in Argo. Always kind of fun to see him, you know. Well, Michael Parks first and foremost, but then it's like, oh, that's Jack Kirby? Awesome. I'm like, that, if Jack Kirby were alive, I'm sure he would have been pretty pleased by that.
And
Michael Parks was amazing.
He really did draw concept art for the real-life Argo plot, so cool for him.
So neat. So 1976, we're looking 2 years after Star Wars. And
79. 79.
Did I just turn that upside down in my stupid head? 79, rather. 2 years away from Star Wars. Star Wars was that giant hit that I don't think I think people knew it was going to make some money, but not nearly what it ended up making. And so, as such, when you see that in Hollywood, it doesn't change much today. They want to go, let's see how we can capitalize on that. And Disney decided to take their swing at the space adventure. And maybe didn't come up quite as good as Star Wars, I don't think. Just maybe a slight swing and a miss.
So, do you guys want me to start getting into it or what?
Well, I mean,
Please do.
Yeah.
Please do.
All right. So here is the deal with the black hole, is that they came up with the concept in 1972. And they came up with it because it was going to be like a Poseidon adventure in space is basically what the concept was in the first place. It's a disaster movie set in space.
That's interesting because while watching this, outside of some of the very obvious ones, I honestly, and I did not read that, I did not know that, but it felt very Poseidon Adventure to me, and that may be partially because of Ernest Borgnine, but you know,
yeah. I mean, come on. If you got access to Borgnine, you got to use Borgnine.
Well, I gotta say, as a modern person, watching one of the things that you see watching this thing is that Anthony Perkins and Ernest Borgnine are probably not your 1-2 punch of what you're looking for to grab all them kids.
The kids will love it.
I mean, kids love some Borgnine and those psycho fans under the age of 11. We need them.
I can tell you when I was that age, when Airwolf was on, I did not watch it because Ernest Borgnine was on the show.
What?
He was a deterrent, not a positive thing.
Certified kid repellent. I like that. You don't want kids to play in your yard. Put up like a life-size cutout of Ernest Borgnine.
Now,
Yeah, wearing a brown zip up so that he looks like a mudslide.
Now, what was that one Ernest Borgnine movie where he was just kind of playing Ernest Borgnine the whole time? Oh, wait, that was
All
all
of
the
them?
oh, yes.
So here's the deal, right? So they want to make they want to make this movie because disaster movies are so big. Like the Poseidon Adventure had just been the second biggest movie in the country at the time. But what ends up happening is that they don't the disaster movie starts to flail and it's on its last legs. And so they're not exactly sure what to do with this thing, so they kind of shelve it. And it goes through massive rewrites again and again and again. And then entering the picture comes Ron Miller, who was in charge of Disney at the time. And Ron Miller has the extraordinary genius luck of marrying Walt Disney's daughter. And he's this former football player. And he rises up through the ranks. He starts as, like an actor, just doing side jobs like that. And he comes up through the ranks of Disney till Walt Disney dies, and he eventually he's in charge of Disney. And he is tired of what people are saying about Disney. He's tired that they're saying that, it's just for kids. It's like little kids movies, because counterculture is, we're like a couple steps past counterculture at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 70, I want to say 76, 77. I don't know the exact date, but he's like, we're gonna make dark movies. We're gonna start making darker movies so we can get them teenage dollars too.
I'm not square, you're
And so
square.
He goes on this. Say what?
I'm not square, you're square.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So he goes on this massive hunt for like what our big movie's gonna be. And he loves the concept of the black hole, which at that time, it's not even called the black hole. It's called Space Station 1. And Space Station 1 is still, like Poseidon Adventure in Space. And he knows that he can't make a disaster movie anymore. And so this script goes through 1,000 different rewrites with 1,000 different writers. And no one can really crack the ending of this, because what happens when you go through the black hole? And there's no satisfying ending. And the first real ending that they had, it becomes like a religious allegory.
Mm-hmm.
And Miller is like, absolutely not. We're not doing that. We have to redo that. And so knowing what this ending turns up to be, why did you say yes to that if you didn't want to have the religious ending?
Yeah.
It makes absolutely no sense to me at all. Anyway, so a bunch of stuff happens. Like, it goes through a bunch of recasting. You have what originally was supposed to be a space station that is falling apart, that everyone has to get safely back to Earth, has a black hole. No one's ever gone through the black hole before. Everyone who does any research at all into black holes realizes like it's kind of theoretical. They know that they're there, but they know almost nothing about them at all. Definitely not what we know now. They're talking to Stephen Hawking. They're talking to all the experts that they can find to try to figure out what would be a satisfying ending for this thing. And no one can ever really come up with one. On top of that, you have all of this pressure from the studio, who's like, we want you to make this movie. No, we don't. We want you to make this other movie. No. We want you to make this movie again. And so everyone's getting goat roped around into making movies that, isn't the movie that they signed up for in the first place. So you have that problem. Then you have the problem of the cast itself, who they ended up getting, that they apparently had a great time making this movie. Because, if you're working on the Disney lots all day, it's probably a fairly easy gig. And it was 3 months of work, and, they're working, your 12-hour day, and it's not that big a deal, and it was fine. And that part worked. But during pre-production, there's this great story that Jennifer O'Neill, the actress Jennifer O'Neill, who was known for like her super famous hair, gets hired on to do the show.
Yes.
And so you know the story?
I know this story. Go ahead.
So when they're doing testing for this, for like camera tests, they're like, her hair is too long and it looks weird when we're in quote 0G in quote. and so she says, and Disney is basically like, you need to cut your hair. And so since she's world famous for her hair, and she is just someone who's nervous to get her hair cut, like most people who have really great hair are.
I can relate.
Say what?
I can relate.
Some of the old
the
pictures.
First thing I think of is great hair when I think of Bruce.
If you look at Bruce's old pictures, though, Bruce had a mane at certain times in his life.
Oh,
for
I saw
sure.
it. I've seen him. I know.
Gorgeous.
And so she calls her stylist no less than Vidal Sassoon.
Ooh.
To come cut her hair. And she is so nervous about it that when Sassoon shows up to cut her hair, she starts getting progressively more drunk as he's cutting her hair. And so he cuts it, and he cuts it a little shorter and a little shorter, and it's pretty short, right? So then she is very, very drunk indeed. And she's like, I got to go home. So she gets in a car, drunk out of her mind, gets into a massive car wreck, and gets fired from the show.
Jeez.
Oh,
Oh, man.
no Uber
Right.
in the 70s, unfortunately.
No, and they hadn't invented cabs either, I think. But that's,
So she was replaced with Yvette Mimieux. I think Mimieux is how you pronounce her name.
Sure.
Yeah.
And just terrific. Like, and Jennifer O'Neill, like, I think that you're probably too young for this, Adam, but maybe you remember the show, Bruce. But she was on this show called Cover Up. It was like in the like early 80s, I want to say. She's on the show called Cover Up, which was this rising success story of a TV show about here's the gig. Undercover models busting operations, like
Awesome.
legal operations.
Love
It is the greatest idea for a TV show ever. However, the lead on the show, who is also a model, and Jennifer O'Neill is on the show. The lead on the show, who's a model, shoots himself in the head, killing himself
Oy.
because he wanted to prove that how unafraid of guns he was, and didn't realize that the gun was loaded.
Well, that is the most unafraid of guns you can be, I suppose.
Yeah, you ain't wrong.
Fear
And
exists
so-
for a reason, though.
Yeah. It makes you a smarter person a lot of times. It just maybe goes.
And so
you know,
Jennifer O'Neill, yet again, due to stupid decision making, is out of a job twice within a span of like 6 or 7 years.
Well, not for nothing, but Jennifer
so-
O'Neill also seems to have had that same problem in life, also making a lot of bad decisions. Married 9 times to 8 men.
Whoa!
Yowza.
Wow!
Just think of that as one bullet you dodged, Adam.
Yeah, no kidding. She's good looking, though. Like, if you look at that picture of her.
I would have been willing to do 3 months as husband number 7. Is that
Hey,
what you're saying?
listen. It's like Pete Davidson. All you got to do is get that
Don't
one
let
hot
that
one.
be the deciding factor. I cannot state that enough.
3 months of fun. All right, sign me up.
Someone in this virtual room has probably made that mistake once before. So, that is like that's the overall story of Black Hole, is that, like, it went through a million different rewrites. It was troubled in the beginning, but once they get shooting. And also the weirdest thing about this movie is they shot it sequentially. Like the whole thing was shot as you see it, which is so strange. But because they didn't have an ending, they had to keep working on different endings to try to like break the story, and they're shooting without an ending.
Oh man, totally unrelated. The Breakfast Club was shot sequentially, believe it or not. And
Really?
you can tell because Anthony Michael Hall gets taller as the movie goes on.
That's amazing. In so much as they got to that dance sequence and decided to leave it in there. They should have. That's the worst part of that entire movie, where is that whole big giant dance sequence. You're like, why is this in here? It's so incongruent with the rest of the movie.
That's generally the only part I watch.
Well, yeah, it's the only fun part of the movie. I'll give you that much. But even then, it's pretty dumb. I don't like that movie that much.
I've got more stuff.
Let's hear it, man.
So,
can I throw in a little something just to break up the flow there? Movie terribly scientifically inaccurate.
What?
Okay, just to give you some perspective, I think Neil deGrasse Tyson claimed this was the most scientifically inaccurate movie ever made.
All that guy does is look for holes, though. Come on, have a little bit of fun, Neil.
The guy they hired to do the novelization of this movie actually sent back notes on how egregiously bad it was, and this guy wasn't like this is a guy whose job is to make novelizations of Disney movies, not PhD in physics. Okay, and even he was.
So if you make an old robot Southern, that's not accurate.
Yeah, exactly. Slim Pickens from that robot, heavily inspired, I heard, from a movie called Star Crash that had a country robot, so they wanted to do that.
What a horrible. I mean, it's like they asked no one. Does this stupid or no? And they're like, yeah, it sounds great. Slim Pickens is everybody loves that guy.
They brought in famed, like incredibly renowned science fiction writer Hal Ellison. Did I get that name right? Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison. I call him Hal because I'm weird.
We're your buddies.
Yeah.
It sounds wrong to your ear, Bruce, because you're saying it right.
Yeah, exactly. So they brought him in, and they thought, now, Harlan Ellison, this is a guy, he's like won awards and stuff. He's written banned comics. So we need to get this guy in as a scientific consultant, a science fiction science consultant on the film. And he was fired on his first day before lunch was over. And the story behind the scenes is, like, while he was at lunch, he started pitching his own movie idea. And he wanted to make an animated pornographic movie with Disney characters. And apparently he's talking about this at lunch, where Roy Disney happens to be at the next table, hears everything, doesn't even know who Harlan Ellison is, but fires him on the spot. Stands up, like, I picture he stands up on the table and says, "Everyone, can I have your attention? This man is fired." Then he gets escorted out of the building and never allowed back in.
So
now,
Pluto
yell at
comes
him
in the room, right?
the head of RoboCop.
Exactly. And then Ellison
You are fired.
Ellison insists it was just a joke, which is kind of easy to believe. Maybe that would be a joke. Like, you wouldn't be serious about that. But it doesn't matter whether it was a joke or not, because Roy Disney didn't think it was funny.
There's a lot of things that you get caught up with and just go like, no, joke. It was a joke. These were all jokes, just jokes. You buy that, right?
He was being sarcastic. That's a good claim now. So I'm just curious, do you think the guiding hand of Harlan Ellison would have made this a little better?
It couldn't have made it much worse. Boom, gotcha, black hole.
But like, here's the thing with this movie, and it's kind of the big problem of this movie, is that it is so dependent on the end working. It's just that kind of movie where they're trying to make it almost like a space thriller. That if they had a satisfying ending and stuck the landing, I think that we wouldn't have cared that it was 2 hours of just meandering nonsense and having little trash cans fly around, shooting things while spinning around. It's a terrible movie for sure. But if you would have stuck the landing of this thing, it would have been a totally different matter.
There is no story. It was meant to be sort of a psychedelic experience that it failed at, I guess.
Okay, so let's get into this, because I think this is something certainly worth discussing. 2001: A Space Odyssey came out in 1968. If you watch this film, there's no way you can't say that this took very heavily from 2001.
Oh, for sure.
I mean,
And
the
here's-
obvious one goes back to Star Wars and everything, but 2001 in so many wild and crazy measures that it is exactly like that.
Here's the thing that kind of amazes me when I'm watching it is, I've read the comparisons to 2001, the comparisons to, they wanted to get in on that sweet Star Wars money. But when I watch this seems to me like a really bad reproduction of Star Trek, the motion picture, but these movies were made almost simultaneously. So the fact that I'm seeing so many similarities, I can't wrap my head around
Star
it.
Trek, Star Trek: The Motion Picture came out 2 weeks after Black Hole did.
Yeah, and which I think it's fair to say that they were produced more or less simultaneously, and the fact that they seem so similar to me is just amazing. I guess there was just a thought about what people wanted that was not quite right going around in 1978, 79.
But there's so many. I mean, there's so many parallels between this and 2001. I mean, stuff down to. I mean, there's obviously the broad stuff, right? Is that the ending is very much kind of in the vein of 2001. A lot of the, everything from like docking and stuff, that's all from 2001. But even down to the level of volume and music, and having those two things be practically at the exact same level, is also
right.
is also very much 2001. If you watch in 2001, over the last probably 5 years, has become my favorite Kubrick film. It's the one I've delved into more than any of his other stuff. I saw it twice in IMAX. I've got it on 4K. So I probably watched it in the last 5 years, probably 10 times. At least 3 of those were in a theatrical setting. So
while we're on the topic of music, there's no way we can talk about this movie without talking about the overture.
Oh, and that's another thing. That's another 2001 thing right there. It is the overture. And I got to say, as far as from a musical standpoint, the overture is the best music in this entire movie. The rest of it is pretty garbage. From a guy who's got a long history of doing big time stuff. John, it's Barry, I believe is his name, the guy that did all the Bond soundtracks.
I don't know what the situation was with
John Barry.
audiences in 1979, but I know for me, when I was watching this, I had to get up and check and make sure something wasn't wrong with my TV when the screen's black for 8 minutes while the music plays.
Oh, I actually timed it. I'm so glad that somebody else brought this up because I thought maybe it was something wrong with my connection or something. But it is honest to goodness, it is 2 minutes and 25 seconds of nothing but black as basically marching band music plays.
Oh, it's better than
And
that. Come on.
And Adam, you work in a theater.
Listen to it. It sounds like marching band music.
It sounds like John
When
Williams
they shift,
ripoff.
once you start seeing visuals, the music shifts into something else.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
But that first 2 minutes and 25 seconds is
not a good
nothing but
overture.
marching band music.
Yeah. Now, Adam, you work at a movie theater that shows the flashback cinema screenings. Now, imagine if they, for some reason, chose to show the black hole, just how many people would come out to say the projector wasn't working before that overture was over.
Well, I can tell you, having seen 2001, which has an overture, that happened a lot. People did not know what was going on.
2001 has a more sophisticated audience than the black hole, I would say.
Yeah.
I would think it would happen more with the black hole.
Oh, certainly. I mean, there were people when I forget what Pixar movie it was. Whenever that Frozen 2 or that little Frozen short came out, that was 15 minutes long. People straight up thought they went to the wrong theater because it started playing that, and they're like, "What is this? Is really what is this? Is this the movie that we didn't come to see Frozen? We came to see whatever the new flick was. I think it was a Coco or something."
And it doesn't help matters that my local theater has on occasion actually shown the wrong movie. So you don't give them much benefit of the doubt. But yeah, the overture band and then the design, this is something you guys know more about the behind the scenes on design than I do. But this is crazy because clearly Vincent and old Bob are designed to get 7-year-olds interested about this property. But everything else is designed to make 7-year-olds hate this property. So this to me seems like two divisions not communicating or something.
Well, they're trying to split the baby with this movie is what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Because what they originally want is is they want an adult centric space movie. However, the higher ups at Disney are like, also make us R2D2, but not R2D2.
Yeah, and stormtroopers, but not stormtroopers.
What the designer basically does is he takes the concept of the Apollo module and kind of flips it upside down and makes it a little rounder and gives it a little helmet so he can sink into his body like a turtle. And they went, perfect. Yes.
Let's paint the eyes on with, just acrylic paint.
But you know the story behind those eyes, Adam? Do you know what happened there?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it. Go tell them.
They wanted to have more complex like equipment in his eyes where it was like multi-camera eyes so that you could show expression and things like that with basically something the size of a quarter, but they couldn't do it in time because everything about this movie was rushed out by the end, because they were nearing deadlines because they'd spent so much time designing everything. Like they even designed their own in-house camera so that they were able to do computer effects with this movie, because Disney had never done that before. So they literally built cameras to do what Star Wars was able to do. They just kind of like reverse engineered it.
Yeah, one of the most prominent uses of that you can tell in the scene where they're all kind of sitting down at the table and the camera itself tracks along the side and you see the background moving in sync with the camera and everything. And for that time and not having the technology and stuff that ILM would have that they kind of developed over the years, them doing that in-house themselves is actually pretty impressive. For something that 2 years earlier the technology didn't exist and George Lucas had to strangle some people going, no, make it better. And then for them to get on board, because here's the thing, this doesn't look as good as Star Wars, but like considering that they didn't have the same resources that ILM did and put in all that grunt work that ILM did, it's not bad. It's not fantastic, but it's not bad.
Saying that this it's not a fair way to compare the camera technology, because that's sort of like having me and Brad Pitt try out clothes by two designers and saying, well, the guy that did Brad Pitt's clothes is clearly better because look how much better that looks. like sometimes it's just not a fair comparison.
Yeah, I mean, but at the same time too, it's clearly what everything was sort of meant to be. But it's strange because, like you said, it's the bifurcation of the story. We have, the group of humans, they have their kind of story. The robots almost sort of have their own story in a way, and that's all clearly for the kids. And even then, they still stink at getting across anything fun and entertaining. We see these robots go meet some other stormtrooper-esque robots that we learn are probably half people. And they have a skeet shooting contest, essentially. And you're like, really? That's what we're doing right now?
When this was released on home video, the tagline should have just been great for nap time. Like when you want your kids to fall
you
asleep,
ain't wrong.
Put this on TV and set them down.
That is the secret. That is the secret success of this movie is that, oh, you know what? I think I want to watch The Black Hole. And you turn it on. I defy you to get through all of it in one sitting. You can't. You can't possibly do it.
I did do it last night, but
you were also doing other things, I bet.
Yeah, I had to do other
little
things.
bit.
The first time I tried to watch this, I surrendered. I just flat up surrendered. The second time I had to, but man, it was watching it out of one eye for a good part of it.
I think a lot of it too, the monotony of it really does come from the score, which once you get the first screen there and you hear that familiar tone, which is very John Barry, which is very James Bondian, and it is repeated ad nauseum, that cue.
Yeah.
And the other a lot of the other music when they're, all the big action scenes and everything, they don't feel like they were made specifically for this movie. They felt like they were cues that they had, and they were like, this is close enough, because it just doesn't match what's going on. You watch like Star Wars, and everything is very specifically done to exactly what's going on screen. Here it's like, well, this cue works good enough, I guess. And it sounds kind of actiony, kind of fighty. Throw that in there. It'll be fine.
Well, who's in charge of Star Wars? I mean, that's really what the story is here. Is that George Lucas, later on it becomes problematic, but in the beginning, George Lucas is a visionary. He knows exactly the look he's going for. He knows his own limitations. He knows what he's great at. He is a good storyteller. He can tell a great story through visual. Like all of these things, Gary Nelson does not have. And Gary Nelson's the director of this thing. And we'll get to him a lot later, but he's a gun for hire. He didn't even want to do this damn movie. It's just that they kept offering him more money and better stars. And by the time that they get to Maximilian Schell, he's like, okay, yes.
I thought Borgnine was who got him there. I can work with Borgnine. That's every director's dream.
I feel like
I'm one of the nines. I'm a Borgnine.
I won't take the job unless I get slim pickings.
I feel like Ernest Borgnine's a guy who would like show up in your trailer with lunch, and like it wouldn't be a lunch that you really want to eat.
Actually, that's exactly what happened on the set.
Are you kidding
That's
me?
exactly what happened on the set. If somebody had a problem with something, Ernest Borgnine would be like the intermediary or the guy to be like, hey, this guy's cold, like stuff like that. and everything would get fixed through Ernie. I
love that.
Killing it.
He does seem like, the nicest guy, though. Whenever you see him, it's like, I bet he was a really nice dude.
If I can shift for a second here, because I have to speak to this.
Let's hear it.
Is that I have two very personal stories with the black hole. One, I don't know if I've said either of these things on air before. Maybe we're just talking. But when I was a little kid, I thought that the black hole was part of Star Wars because I was little, So like, oh, well, there's robots there and there's robots in this and it's in space.
Yeah.
And so they're all the same thing.
Makes sense.
And so for a bunch of years, I loved the black hole for as much as I loved Star Wars. And I went years thinking that until I think by the time Empire Strikes Back comes out, I realized, oh, these are not the same thing. and so I'm able to separate the two things. However, my love for the black hole continued because it wasn't something that you could see, like it wasn't on like VHS very often. It didn't come on TV at all, ever. And so I went years without seeing this and had a love for it. And this is the movie. This is the second part of this, is that this is the movie that made me go, oh, there's a lot of things that I loved as a kid that I shouldn't watch because I loved this movie. And when I finally saw it again as an adult, I was like, what is this crap? This is the worst movie I've ever seen. I was such a dumb kid to love this movie because it's boring. And I can remember my parents actually complaining in the movie theater while we were watching this movie.
This is terrible.
Like they were so upset that I forced them to watch this thing.
It's funny because I've kind of got a little bit of the opposite experience with this because I grew up in a very science fiction-y heavy household and everything. Second generation nerd, have I said on the show plenty of times previously. So there was, you had to, get to a certain quality level before we really started watching, what was going on. So Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff, that's where the boat swifted to. And Black Hole was always, it was a joke. It was a joke back then. And I watched it, probably 10, 11, 12, somewhere in that neighborhood. And yeah, it's especially for a kid who it feels like that's who it's kind of marketed towards. It's not for them at all. But I actually... through subsequent watchings, and especially through this one, while it's still not a great movie, I respect the movie a little bit more these days, just on account of what they were doing, what they were trying to do, what they clearly could not do. But it felt a little bit more substantial this time for me. And again, I think since I had originally watched it and everything, certainly my knowledge of cinema has grown immensely. And again, having seen like 2001 as many times as I have, just watching how this movie is so in love with what Kubrick was doing, but unfortunately, they just do not have the skills that man and his team possessed. Not even close.
And you know, the memory of a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old works really strangely. So I don't know how reliable this memory is, because this is a movie that came out when I was like in kindergarten. But I have I have memories of this getting an extreme push. Like I feel like marketing really, really tried to convince children they had to see this movie. Now, the way a 5-year-old's mind works, that might mean that I saw 2 commercials on the same day for this movie.
Wow.
Or it might actually mean that there was like blanket stuff going on. But I know that despite not getting an opportunity to see this movie, I was very familiar with Maximilian and Vincent because they looked like toys I wanted at the time.
Right. And I did too. And I know that they had those toys. I just don't remember ever having them. But I did have the little kid storybook about the black hole.
Oh, cool.
And it was one of my favorite books as a little kid because, you know, Star Wars.
Well, I think
so. That is really where the solidification came in of, oh, I really love this thing.
And you know, I lived in a time where if you couldn't see a movie and one of your friends had one of those old fashioned tin lunch boxes, I know that somebody had a black hole lunch box. And I remember like him letting me stare at the front of his lunchbox for a few minutes, and that was watching the movie.
What
Strangely, a very similar experience to actually watching the movie.
Look at time's up, boy.
Close, actually. Yeah. Hey, turn it to the side.
Wait, let me complete it all for you.
Then at the very end, he opens the lunchbox and it's like filled with something you don't expect to be in a lunchbox. That's the movie.
It's like,
all right. So, okay. Adam, this is one of the things that you kept talking about when this movie came up, is you constantly talked about just how gay this movie is.
Yes.
So do you still feel like this movie is very, very gay?
It's not as gay as I thought it was. My memory was it was way gayer, but I also have a theory this time. Now, first of all, let me tell you where the theory kind of came from, I guess. Well, you'll know if you watch it. So you've got the 2 main leads of this movie. I'm forgetting all the names here. What are
well, it's Anthony Perkins, it's Robert Forrester,
yeah,
it's Joseph Bottoms, Maximilian Schell.
So you got Schell and Perkins there. They just have a conversation in this movie that I just remembered seeing years ago, probably maybe 10 years ago, I guess at this point. And just I saw like a lot of gay undertones in it, and to a degree, perhaps maybe there is. Maybe it was a little bit more of a kind of an odd hero worship, but it seemed super gay at the time. And to a degree, I still kind of stand by that. Maybe not as much as I had initially thought, but all of a sudden, Anthony Perkins wants to stay behind. He's like, no, he's a brilliant man. Like, it really seems like his character, for what little bit of character development we have in this film, it turns. It turns when they see this Maximilian character. He's like, oh no, this guy, he's a smart man. He's the best man. He's the greatest man that there ever was. And they're sitting at the dinner table. They're kind of exchanging these side glances and everything. And anything that Max says, he's just like, oh yeah, no, he's the best. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. And so I guess my thought then turned to, because not too long after that, you said they shot this in order. I think not after that, they looked back at rushes and were like, oh man, this movie seems super gay. Let's kill that character right now. And then all of a sudden he's dead.
Well, that's not where the big talk came in with that, because the big talk came. Go ahead, Bruce. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, before we move on, I just want to give a little historical cinematic context here too, because 1979 was a time that even if you did want to make a movie that appealed to gay audience members, you had to be sneaky about it. It was a time where the studio system would not allow you to say, hey, this is a movie that we hope gay people will enjoy. Like your movie can't even publicly acknowledge gay people exist, or else it's suddenly midnight cinema or something.
Correct.
So filmmakers that did want to be more inclusive had to find allegorical ways to tell their stories rather than telling it at face value. And we don't mean that as a negative thing at all, to say it's like a hidden gay cinema. It was a technique that had to be used
of the time.
Yeah. And just to be clear, like, I think that's a cool thing if you're seeing that. I didn't see as much of it, but then when you start talking about it, it kind of makes sense. And the way that Maximilian Schell's character, Reinhardt, I think was his name, that he was not accepted by general society, so he had to go out on his own and find a new way. I mean, I can see how there could be some allegorical aspects there, and I think that's kind of a cool thing, not a negative thing at all.
And I just on a personal note here, if I were a gay man, and there are days where I sure wish I was. I would want to be the Anthony Perkins, the Tony Perkins gay. Like that's my aspirational gay to go to, especially towards the end of his life where he's like tan and just living in Hollywood and like he's a fresh dandy, you know, like he looks crisp every day and he's tan and happy and like kind of a heavy drinker, but enjoying that he's a heavy drinker,
having a good time with it.
That is how you do it. That is how you do it.
See, for me, it's Jim Bullock or bust.
Hey, the late great Joel Schumacher. He just died. Last week or whatever, and he was one of those guys who got around an awful lot in Hollywood and very much celebrated his gaiety with just about anybody who would ask. It seems because according to him,
well, he's got Wilt Chamberlain numbers, right? I mean, that's what he claims. Like 20,000 people.
Oh,
right?
It's unbelievable. It's so great to hear those stories, and he was so nonchalant about it too. When you'd hear him talk about, like, oh yeah, I get around a little bit. I have fun. I'm a guy who has a lot of fun, and you know what? I wouldn't trade it for nothing. I'm like, hey, good for you, buddy. Live whatever you do, man.
What he doesn't mention, the bulk of those numbers came from July 4th weekend in 1993. But that's a story for another day.
A lot of longshoremen coming in.
So
guys, not nearly as gay as I had initially thought.
You want me to go to my notebook here?
Sure.
Please, Sean.
So the first thing up is that Roddy McDowall as the voice of Vincent. Is this where he starts basically the second half of his career where he's doing voiceover work? Because that's the majority of his work after this movie is mostly as a voice talent.
I kind of blame Planet of the Apes for that because, when you're hiding in that costume, it's people don't know your face, but they know your voice. And that becomes what's marketable. And given the choice with relatively similar salaries, voice work's a better gig than, being on camera if you're not egotistical.
I can't believe it's named Vincent. It should be called Bartlett's. How many times can he say this? Just quote after quote. And shut up. Stitch in Time saves 9. No one gives a crap. Shut up. We're in some. And he's always. You thought C-3PO was pompous. This guy is pompous, and he's kind of put together. At least C-3PO is more like blustered all the time. This one is like, I'm smarter than all of you, and here's a little quip to tell you why.
And a little confession here, for a good many years, I thought Malcolm McDowell and Roddy McDowall were the same person.
That's a don't watch Caligula then.
I could see that. I could totally see that. Also the fake, like that pseudo fake smart by just shooting off lines like that isn't intelligent.
Yeah, just your little
memorizing phrases.
Yeah, for like, Benjamin Franklin books or some such nonsense. It's things like that where you're like
Richard's Almanac.
Okay, sure. I guess. I mean, does that make you smarter than everybody? And then, of course, he's a wild and crazy gunslinger too. And you're like, what is this? What is it? What do they make these droids for? And why are there people if they can do all? Why do you have these two things that walk? Like you've got these guys that walk around with the stiff legs doing kind of the, let's be honest, it's the Nazi march. They're goose stepping around there. And you've got this other one who can not only float but do like 360s and stuff while in the air shooting guns. Why would you have the ones that can't walk?
I think it's older versus newer or something.
Yeah, that's what they imply actually in the script.
Yeah,
is that they're like the newest, best model.
But then you have the beat up country model who looks like like their first iteration of this robot caught on fire.
Yeah,
and they were like,
no, got beat up by the lead robot.
Yeah,
that's what it says.
But I like to think it's the it's on set. They were like, oh man, this thing caught on fire. No, don't scrap it. We can use this. What
now,
if we make them country?
The real story behind the character design on Old Bob, why he looks so beat up?
No.
So they made a clay model. And what was was it Glenn Nelson? Is that the name of the director?
It's Gary Nelson is the director.
Gary Nelson. So they had a clay model that had a little bit of battle damage. Gary Nelson looks at it and says, that's not damaged enough. Somewhere he gets a bat and starts
It's Ron
smashing.
Miller. It's the producer who does
Oh,
that.
I'm sorry. Was it Ron Miller that did this? Gets a bat, starts smashing the clay model with the bat after he's hit it about 7 times, says, okay, now that's more like it. And they made a faithful replica.
Which is also hilarious because one of the things that this movie does that Star Wars itself didn't do, or vice versa, rather, Star Wars was what made that so awesome is that it was this dirty, gross, lived-in reality. It felt like what we were looking at came from a real planet because everything was used and worn. Here, they go back, for the most part, save for this beat-up robot, they go back to that super slick, everything's clean and good-looking, and it feels like a set, which, by the way, amazing how many sets and stuff that they built for this. This movie, it cost like $20 million. It only made like $30 million, so it made no money, whereas Star Wars cost half of that and made 8 billion times more than that. So it's weird.
It was the most expensive Disney movie ever made at the time. And they were really chasing after that Star Wars money.
Yeah.
And, it just failed miserably.
Can't blame you.
The next note I have is that you know what you're in for with this movie when you don't see a single human being for the first 5 minutes of a movie. There's nothing.
Yeah.
There's literally nothing.
Yep, leaning into that 2001 was just like, we're doing it slow. And the thing is that 2001 is way longer than this movie, and this movie feels twice as long as that, which is
And
astounding.
Sean,
Well, yeah.
Sean, I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but we already referenced The Breakfast Club a little bit earlier. I think I saw that John Hughes did that green grid artwork that comes right after the overture.
No.
John Hughes? I don't think
Yes,
No.
that's why it was crazy. I got to look this up.
I don't
now.
think that's
Keep going.
right.
It's not the same guy, I can tell you that.
I mean, John Hughes
John
was-
Hughes at this moment he's an advertising executive.
Yeah, I was about to say he's probably like in his early 20s.
Okay, hold on. John Hughes created the green grid sequence that appears in the opening titles. It was the longest computer graphics sequence ever to appear in a film at the time. I'm going to click on the hyperlink to see which John Hughes they're talking about. They are talking about the John Hughes who did visual effects for The Hunger Games, Planet of the Apes, X-Men, Frequency. Okay, not the same.
Oh,
John
you
Hughes.
meant John Hughes. Okay.
Did I say it wrong?
Oh, with an H.
John
This is
Hughes.
one of 11 John Hughes that are on IMDb. Okay.
Mix it up, parents. Let's
But
name
hey,
him
he
something
did
else.
work on Garfield, A Tale of Two Kitties, for what that's worth.
That's sequel
Brilliant.
money right there. Anything else?
The best line in this movie, by the way, from Anthony Perkins talking to Reinhardt, he goes, "You'll be recognized as one of the greatest space scientists of all time." Space scientist.
Yeah.
oh, man.
Oh man, that graphic, that visual effects guy, John Hughes, is the link between the Black Hole and Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Worked on both of those at about the same
Well,
time.
there's a lot of overlap, man. The guy who did all of the paintings for this movie also worked on Star Wars. So
Very
And
cool.
and Dick Tracy, I saw. Like one of the production designers also worked on Dick Tracy's. We covered that not too awful long ago.
So the name of the ship is the Cygnus, the one that Reinhardt is on. I did not realize this because I was like, where's that name coming from? So I looked it up. And that's the name of the constellation where the first black hole was discovered.
Huh.
So that's pretty cool.
Now, a little bit of trivia I ran across is that the robot was named Maximilian before they cast Maximilian Schell. But they changed the way it was spelled so that it's spelled like Maximilian Schell's first name. They originally spelled it differently, but I thought that was kind of cool because I just assumed they gave the robot the name after they got the actor.
I would like him to be like, excuse me, can you rewrite this so the robot's named after me, please? Thank you.
I just wonder if Borgnine was demanding they change old Bob's name to Ernest or something.
Can you call him Ernie? That would be swell. Any other?
I got three more notes here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Producers wanted a alien Sigourney Weaver for the female lead in this? And the
Nice.
casting director said absolutely not.
No one could ever imagine her beating up an alien, so no thank you.
Incredible. Disney was about to drop this project altogether until May 1977. Which makes sense.
Wait a second. Damn it.
And finally, personal note, art director of The Black Hole, his son used to date my ex-wife.
Huh.
Well, was he the one who made that clay model that got smashed?
That's
Like whoever the artist was that made that model, they went on at least a month of passive aggressive actions towards the guy who did the smashing. That's got to get on.
No,
there.
he wasn't a model guy.
Good.
He's set. He was a sets guy.
Cool.
He made all of the sets.
And there's a boatload of sets in this thing. And listen, it's not fantastic, but there's something about it too that I kind of liked it a little bit more on this watching than I'd seen in others. It's still not good, mind you, but let's get into that actually. And before we do though, we do want to say a big giant thank you to all the people who voted on this over at patreon.com/HMP. You guys voted, and listen, I'm glad that I got to watch this again. It was kind of fun getting back to it. Before we get to our final reviews here, we do have to ask ourselves one very important question: is how this movie relates back 1-to-1 with Sylvester Stallone.
Why, thank you, Adam. I have a prepared statement. Gary Nelson was the director of The Black Hole. He made a name for himself at Disney after directing the Jodie Foster 1976 version of Freaky Friday. And while I'm sure directing this mess was a monumental task, I think it's fair to say that even with Gary Nelson at the helm, The Black Hole sucks. This movie sucks more than an edited-for-television musical rendition of the movie Requiem for a Dream.
I'd watch that, by
In
the way.
1981, Gary Nelson would agree to direct the movie Nighthawks, starring Rutger Hauer and Sylvester Stallone. But before shooting started, he was dismissed. And they started shooting with Stallone directing for the first day of principal photography before a new director reported to set. And for that, both Stallone and the production got into trouble with the Directors Guild. And no matter how much digging I do, I can't find the reason why Gary Nelson was fired from the movie. My best guess is that someone from Nighthawks actually watched The Black Hole and he was immediately fired afterward. But for whatever reason, Gary Nelson will be put in director's jail for years after getting fired from that movie, working on a long string of TV movies and television shows, until he'd make his triumphant comeback with a movie called Jimmy the Kid, starring red-hot superstar Gary Coleman.
Yeah.
Immediately after that movie came out, Gary Nelson was put back into director's jail, where he would work on TV movies with names like Murder Me, Murder You, More Than Murder, and Murder in 3 Acts.
I love it.
Sounds like a theme.
Real titles. But Hollywood decided to give Gary Nelson one last shot. Gary Nelson, Hollywood pleaded, we're going to give you one last chance, so please make the most of it. And Gary Nelson listened. He worked harder than a migrant farmer and directed the movie Alan Quatermain and the Lost City of Gold. We've had enough, said Hollywood, and after that, Gary Nelson would be banished to television for the rest of his career. He would make countless TV movies, and the last stop in his career was directing 19 episodes of the TV show Early Edition, where each morning a man played by Kyle Chandler gets tomorrow's newspaper a day early, so he knows what's going to happen in the future. Old TV shows. I've given Gary Nelson a hard time, but the fact of the matter is he worked from 1962 to 2000 consistently, and nothing he ever directed was the worst thing ever put to film except for The Black Hole. It's embarrassing. And there you have it, HM Peeps. This week's Stallone Connection is Gary Nelson. I'm Sean Kovacs. Thank you for the 5-star review we're going to give our show if you haven't already.
This is going to surprise you. My parents loved Early Edition. I know people in the old people loving
It was
that
made for them.
CBS crap, man. They love it to death. Well, here at Hero Movie Podcast, we have our own patented Robin rating system. If you'd like to check that out, head on over to reddit.com/r/Hero Movie Podcast and join up today, man. We'd like to. I think we got like 26 people on there so far, so we're starting to build up a little bit of steam.
Stop using numbers for that.
That's just
Stop using numbers.
But
you always use
please
numbers.
join us at Reddit.
You're making it less than.
I want more then. That's my point. But so check us out over there and, be one of the early adopters is what I'm saying. All right, let's go with Bruce. Bruce, where does the black hole fall in the Robin rating system for you?
Oh boy, the black hole. I just want to read a review from the New York Times. There's a film reviewer named Janet Maslin, and she wrote that the film is, quote, attractively unpretentious, at times quite snappy. Among the more sensational stunts is a shot of a huge molten meteor rolling towards a crew of tiny people who appear to be right in its path. Its story about a band of explorers and a wicked space tyrant who pretends to be nice has a comic book feeling. But as comic books go, this one is pretty much a page turner. So that review convinces me of probably two things. Number one, Janet Maslin has absolutely never read a comic book. Number two, she may have never seen a movie before this, because, we all have an idea in our minds, like what was it like in the 70s? Well, we all kind of think people that did our jobs a generation before just had a way easier time of getting success. That's just, I think, human nature. So I think like 1979 was when you go down to the unemployment office and they say, let's see, what do we got? Well, they're looking for a movie reviewer at the New York Times. What does it pay? $4 an hour. Sign me up. Or like you're working in the New York Times trying to sell subscriptions after school, and they're like, our movie reviewer has food poisoning and can't go see the black hole. So Janet Maslin jumps up and waves her hand. I'll do it. Like you just hear so many of those stories from back then.
Yeah,
on how
those
easy
things
it was
happened
to make it big.
I mean, they happen even up until today with like even local like places that aren't even big. There's so many people that have gotten into movie reviews and as far as newspapers go, who had no inclination to do as such, but they've been doing it for like 30 plus years.
Yeah, multiple professional comic book writers that I know personally, like a generation ahead of me, got their jobs like by working in the warehouse and needed somebody to write a story, or they kept writing letters to the editor. Like it's crazy the way things used to go. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the fact that I think this might be the worst film we've ever reviewed. I think I would rather rewatch Batman and Robin than rewatch this. So if this is the worst film I think we've ever reviewed, I have to give it a Jason Todd.
Yowza. Sean, what do you got?
Yeah, it's same for me. This is a Jason Todd. This movie is terrible. I love it, but I love it because it's got that sheen of, like my childhood to it. But it's an awful movie. I would suggest no one ever watch it. It is a Jason Todd all the way.
But if you did want to watch it, it is on Disney Plus right now, and I think this was the first time I'd actually seen it in its full aspect ratio and everything, which was kind of nice. And I think another reason,
I'm gonna forget. I'm sorry for cutting you off, Adam. This movie is basically the bad version of Ad Astra. That is what this movie is.
Kind of, yeah. But it's. Yeah, I can't go any higher than Jason Todd. It's bad, but there is something about it that
I love it.
Yeah, there's a tiny bit of charm still in there. It's a slog and a half to get through. Even in an hour and a half, it feels like 2.5 hours. The music is drone-inducing, boring, but there is a little something special about it. And so, maybe you might want to check that out. Like I said, it's on Disney Plus right now, so if you need a nap this weekend, throw on some Black Hole, and you're bound to slip off into slumberland.
You will sleep
in no time. Quick, better than PGA golf, I'm told. So that is it, everybody. Again, big giant thank you to everyone who voted on this and everything that we do over at patreon.com/HMP. Next week, we are asking Bruce to step behind the mic here I don't want him behind the mic. I want him behind the bass, taking his swing with E.T. the Killer. Ooh, that's available on Shudder right now as we record this, at least. Who knows how things work over there? Sometimes things come and go. But next week, we're going to be covering Takashi Miike's E.T. the Killer. I'm the only one who's seen it, and let me tell you, these boys are in for a time. Until then, Bruce, where can we find more of your work on the internet?
I want people to go check out Chubby Wizard. The new DC comic event, Dark Knight's Death Metal, just got underway recently, so we start off talking a whole lot about that. It's marketed as an anti-crisis event, and we have some good conversation about that if you want to see what we feel about that. Of course, I'll warn you, you have to sit through a lot of weird talk about negotiating for hotel prices in the 80s. It's weird. I don't know how we got off on that tangent, but stick around. I promise the good stuff's there eventually.
What if I don't eat the continental breakfast? Can you knock off a couple of bucks there?
Yeah.
Like, sir, that's not how it works. Ah, crap. Got to make my own pancakes. Sean, where else might they go?
Why don't you listen to one of Germany's favorite podcasts, Snowpiercer 30 Questions, where we got a glowing review from Germany.
Yeah, it's really bizarre, but we'll take it, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like a verified German user on Twitter there, too.
And the review likes our podcast more than the show that we're reviewing.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, me too. So please, Snowpiercer 30 Questions. I really enjoy our time on that show.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and the show is, in my opinion, the show is really, really great. And I it's something I look forward to every week, and we hope you guys are enjoying.
It's
that
nice
as well.
having a show to look forward to.
Oh yeah, there's so much that we just go, oh Jesus, now we're going to do this, and that's like, oh sweet, another episode of Snowpiercer.
Like HMP this week.
Yeah, I put it off until last night, so yeah, I had a whole week to do it, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know. So check that out, Snowpiercer 30 Questions, wherever you find podcasts, and check out the Film Find as well. That is it, everybody. Join us next week for Ichi the Killer, for Sweet Sean's Kovacs from the internet, Bruce Leslie. My name's Adam Portress. Stay super, everybody.
Bye, Marty and Evie.
In my eyes, indisposed, in disguises no one knows, has the face, lies the snake, in the sun, in my disgrace, boiling heat, summer stench, neath the black, the sky looks dead, call my name through the cream, and I'll hear you scream again. Black hole sun, won't you come, wash away the rain. Black hole sun, won't you come, won't you come, won't you come. Stuttering, cold and damp, steal the warm wind, tired friend. Times are gone for honest men, and sometimes far too long for snakes. In my shoes, walking sleep, in my youth I pray to keep heaven send hell away. No one sings like you anymore. Black hole sun, won't you come, wash away the rain. away the rain like all the sun. Won't you come?